on, everybody? This is Real with Juan Martinez, a.k.a. Dr. Love.
And Stephanie Rave.
What is going on, man? We got a serious case of the giggles.
I think that happens before every single show, but that's a good thing because laughter is
sometimes they're
medicine.
Just like laugh attacks. Like they're like, some of them are just like little laughs, and then some of them are like,
that if somebody came in and didn't know what was happening, they think we were crazy.
Yeah,
you know?
or
be like,
in today's society, probably high.
Yeah.
Yeah, so big shout out to G, because it's his birthday. You know that?
Yes.
Yeah, that was a hard pause.
Well, it was yesterday.
Yeah, but I mean...
Okay, his birthday week, month-ish. Yes.
Yeah, well, it's not like today, but the radio show is today. Happy birthday. We got to give him the shout out, you know. Him and Marco, the media guy,
make it all possible.
Make it all possible behind the scenes. And so, G's, just when you know it, you look up and G's standing behind a camera somewhere. That's usually what happens. And so, check it out, man. Super exciting news for Get Rap Church. I was going to say replacing our tent. We're
enlarging the place of our tent.
Yeah, man. What does that mean, Steph?
So that means in the physical aspect that we're making space for so many more people to come join us on Sundays.
Yeah.
Sundays when we do our hubs midweek, when we do our conferences.
It's going to be fine.
It's just awesome because we get to have one thing that I think I mentioned before was that we're at our congregation is large, but because we're split into services, not everyone sees each other. It's like first service people, no first service people, and second service people, no second service people. And so then you see each other in passing. But, hopefully, eventually, as we get larger and larger, more people can connect and spend time together on Sunday. And
Monday and Tuesday.
Bring their families in. I know a lot of people
hang out.
Love bringing their families to church and experiencing it for the first time. So that's really awesome. And then, hangouts begin. So not only are we, what's the saying? We grow larger when we grow smaller. I said it wrong, but it's something along those lines.
I don't really know the saying, but I know that you got to be
saying like that, right? Exactly. So when we do our hangouts, it's just an amazing time because you get to connect with people more outside of the walls and just do fun things and activities. Because for some reason we forget how to hang out when we give our lives to Christ. We're and I say we because I've experienced it before too.
Yeah,
where you're
I think
just
does.
Okay, what do we do now that we're not drinking at the
club? I think a lot of social media had to do with that too. I feel like I saw you, even though if I didn't see you, because I see you posting all the time, and it's kind of weird. People are
you're oh, that's
media friends.
Mm-hmm.
You have media friends and you have real friends.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the media friends, you get what I'm saying?
So it gets kind of twisted sometimes where they think that because they know you on social media that they're friends with you, but you're not real. You get to know people in real life, you know, in the flesh. You you see them upset, you see them happy, you see them laugh, all of that.
So thank you for all the people who are subscribing to our YouTube channel. This is real. Our podcast, This is Real. And just for the constant support through letters, man. We love reading your letters. We're going to be writing y'all back here soon. Write to us, man, and let us know, and
let us know
topics.
We love hearing the stories of how you guys are listening to the show behind bars, and that's awesome because that's the main purpose of This Is Real. So that's an amazing thing.
Let me ask you a question. People want to know. They want to know. So today I'm going to interview you a little bit. We're just going to talk. We're just going to chop it up a little bit. Hey, matter of fact, I'm going to be on that show soon. The Chop It Up in Houston.
Oh, Let's Chop It Up. Shout out to Let's Chop It Up.
Yeah. So, okay, here we go.
Sure.
Tell us a little bit about your life, right? Because they see you here, they see you, doing your thing, but I mean, you always been in church, or were you a wild thing, or what's going on? Tell us a little bit about your testimony.
Sure. Yeah.
Come on, we want to hear it. I mean, people want to hear it. They want to know. Give them what they want. This is what they want. They want to know.
So they're gonna have my back, and you guys are gonna put a bunch of comments later and send in letters saying how much other stuff you want to know about Pastor Juan.
Let's see if she'll cry.
I'm sure I will. I cry a lot more easily now than in the past, but.
What's up?
Well, yeah. So I was raised in church. I have, my parents are from Colombia. I have 2 older sisters and an older brother. I'm the youngest of 4.
Colombia.
I represent Mad Horde. No, yeah. I mean, I was born. My 2 older sisters were born in Colombia, and then me and my brother were born here. But I mean, Spanish in the household, Colombian food all the time. My mom making arepas in the morning,
Yeah.
pretty hardcore Colombian. So yeah, I always do get pushback because they're like, well, you weren't born there. I'm like, but I'm from there. My blood.
You're like,
yeah.
It bleeds yellow,
blue, and red.
Yellow. Oh my God. So
No,
okay,
but-
so this is how you're growing up. Now
Yeah.
you know there's a whole lot of Colombian things. So were you like on the drug scene and all that?
I was not.
Okay.
No, but my parents were in Colombia in the 80s. So everything that you hear about that kind of stuff, that was real to them.
Yeah.
Right. I don't know fully the extent of all that kind of stuff, but
Yep.
I know that they came, to the U.S. to not be in that lifestyle in that world. And so that's when my brother and I were born here. And I just grew up in church, grew up with a strong, faith-based family, read the Bible every day in Spanish, Reina Valera.
Wow,
So,
not the Reina Valera,
yeah,
not
in
the
the
King
Reina
Jimmy.
Valera. Yeah.
That's hard.
I saw a lot of great faith moves in my family, you know,
Nice.
as a young age. So I have really good memories of that. But I also knew a lot of struggle in the sense that, my parents were here illegally in a sense after a certain time period because their visa expired. And so they had that struggle of, kind of being under the, I guess in the shadows, right? Because you can't work a regular job and you can't do this.
Yeah.
So I mean, my
and
parents
you're pretty you rep that hard.
Yeah, I try to because I feel like being born and raised here, a lot of people have misconceptions about that.
Yeah.
You hear all the time, and not trying to be cause division or anything like that. But a lot of times people hear oh, well, they come here and they take jobs and you take this money and all these benefits. And the reality is that there's probably a small percentage that have the the audacity to try to go through something like that, because that can get you incarcerated. But the larger percentage, are not. They're struggling. They don't have the wisdom or basically just the information to say that this is what you can receive, because you can't receive things if you're not here legally. You know what I mean? How are you going to receive benefits if you don't have a social?
Everybody's like, fake IDs.
Everyone's like, yeah, they're taking this, that. And so, I mean, at least what I experienced. I know.
Because through your lens, I guess you speak from a place of your parents, right?
Well, and I also, I know a lot of times, I mean, because it's just facts of life. It's especially back then, where my parents were presented a lot of opportunities, some crazy opportunities. They were offered, well, marry this person so that you can get, your legalization, or even, which I don't know if I'm allowed to share this, but even they offered to buy my brother.
Wow.
My brother was a really cute baby and stuff, and they were like, give us your son and we'll help you, so those are real things that in a time of desperation, anybody could just go and do that. But because of my parents' beliefs,
big shout out to your parents and not selling your brother.
Not selling my brother, not getting divorced for something legal, not marrying someone else just for that kind of stuff. So I did see that, so I guess I just tried to at least expand the knowledge of what you said, of what I experienced.
Yeah.
But yeah, there was, struggles and a lot of faith too. So
okay, so then you grew up in church, and so you get older. What kind of starts happening in Stephanie's life? What does that look like?
Yeah. So for me,
because you were in church.
I was in church my entire life, and we were Assemblies of God when I was elementary. So from Stars, Missionettes, and then to youth group, we went to a non-denominational church. And so I would say as my teens, I was very, very strong in my relationship with the Lord.
Okay.
I was the one who didn't like to cuss, who didn't like to, say no to my parents, who didn't, I was cookie cutter, straightforward. And then my brother, who was a year older than me, he was a little bit more rebellious. So then it made me more protective of what we were doing. But then eventually that just kind of blurred, after high school years. I mean, I was just having this conversation yesterday, actually, where I think we were talking about stuff in middle school. And I was like, yeah, when I was in middle school, I said people were sneaking out. People were going to clubs in middle school. To you, that's normal. But to not everyone, they were like, what, really? We didn't go to our first club till we were 18.
Yeah.
And I was like, I had friends who were sneaking out at 14, and going to clubs and drinking and all this stuff. And I didn't do any of that. So, I mean, obviously, eventually down the line, I think for me, and I've shared it before on the show, that I think as much as I had a relationship with the Lord, I feel like I didn't walk out a lot of the things that I read or believed in.
Yeah.
So I feel like it didn't give me the strength, or the experience to say that, okay, well, let me not go down this road, right? Because it was kind of a head knowledge and not a heart knowledge.
Yeah.
And so I would say probably my senior year in high school is when I kind of started hanging out with the wrong crowd. And well, same crowd, but now doing it.
Yeah.
Because it was the same people. But, you know, I started drinking and clubbing and partying and all of that. So that's whenever that started leading to, you know, boys, relationships. And I think the foundation that I had, even though it was very solid, and I wouldn't say that I went as far left as it possibly could have gone.
Yeah.
I think it was a little bit of like a religious thing, because I didn't fully understand God's grace and forgiveness, right? So for me, which I'm just going to be vulnerable, I lost my virginity.
You know, the show is This Is Real.
Yeah, I lost my virginity at 17. And even though I read the Bible and I believed everything that it said, I didn't believe that because of that one mistake that he could renew me and restore me. So then in my head, I was like, well, I've already lost it. Then there's nothing I can do to take it back. So literally that was my thought process. I didn't fully understand that. It wasn't until a few years later that I was like, wait, like, no, he can still make me whole again. And that doesn't define me, you know, just because in my Christian, you know, teenager mind, I was like, you know, I'm going to save myself until marriage. And it's like, if that's not how it panned out, like I'm still saved because of who he is. And
because he still loves you.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So, okay, but that you look like you were gonna have a moment, you know, like so now you are older, you're in your 20s and stuff like that. What would you say that looked like for Stephanie, the one who was at church, who started kind of veering off into the wrong thing? Are you now, you know, I don't know, is there a fight with spirit and flesh? Like, what's happening now with Stephanie, right? Because
Go ahead.
you've had both parts of your life.
Yeah.
But now you're in your 20s, right? So what happens?
Well, I think 20s is like, to me, 20s was like forever long. I'm like, dang, I'm ready to be 30. I just turned 29, but I'm like, all right, we ready for 30 is going to be great.
Because you had that COVID year with like 4 years.
Yeah, but even like in the span of your 20s, I feel like when you're in your early 20s, you think you know everything. You really do. And like even being 29, 28 last year, like you look back at your 23, 24-year-old self and you're like, you were so dumb. But we think we know it all because we're in our 20s, you know? And so for me, my 20s has been like a lot of stages of growth that I feel like have molded me as a whole, you know, because in my early 20s, you know, I had to figure out that, okay, you know, God still loves me. I don't have to, you know, be lukewarm. I can't be in and out. And so, you know, giving myself completely to God. And then I would say as I matured more, probably like 25, 26, something like that, it was walking out those things, right? So for me, it's kind of just been like in stages of growth of, you know, my relationship with God, because I think we were sharing on Live at 9 about how how a lot of times like we think that we can do things ourselves, and we just go and get exhausted. And so I feel like that was a lot of me probably like mid-20s, you know, because it was like, okay, well, this is what I know I need to do, this is what I know I heard from God, and so this is what we're gonna do to make it happen, right? And so it was very night and day, because what you were asking about, you know, is there a fight with spirit and flesh? It was like I became that person to where instead of being a light to like my friends and my family, I was very much like, well, no, I listen to God only, you know, I don't hang out and do these things anymore, and you should be doing these things with me. You know, and it was very much like that. And it's like, that's not how you really share. You're not allowing people to really see the transformation that he made in you. You're just speaking it instead of showing it. You know, and so that was kind of like I would say like a lonely, darker period of my time. I wouldn't say I was like depressed or anything, but I was lonely, you know, because I basically, you know, stepped away from God. I didn't have no relationships with my, you know, believer friends. And then I had stopped partying and hanging out with all of my party friends. And so then it was just me by myself, and I had to learn. Yeah, it literally, and it was so funny because I remember this moment because it was so like dumb. It was a 4th of July. So it was like not a big holiday, you know, it wasn't my birthday, it wasn't Christmas. It was just 4th of July, and I didn't have anybody to hang out with. Like, I think my parents were out of town or something, and my friends were partying, and I didn't have any relationships with the people that I was going to church with.
Or partying, you know?
Yeah, I wasn't doing either. So I was like, this sucks, you know. And of course the flesh can be like, well, just go party with them, or just, you know, go do this. And then your pride's like, well, I don't want to ask people to be my friend, I don't know how to do that, you know. So that part, you know, was, but then I feel like, you know, God showed me a lot about relationships and friendships, and how that really is vital to your walk with God, because in those moments when people see you sad, when people see you upset, when people see you happy, like that's where you can build like your relationships, and you can walk out your faith, because it takes a believer to say, man, you really upset me and I was hurt by it, but I'm going to forgive you because God forgave me, and we're going to move past this, because in the world you just cut people off, you don't have any necessary like desire to maybe help someone else grow. And I feel like that was a lot of my later 20s of like, okay, I know I need to grow. I know even if I cut all these people out of my life that aren't good for me, which is necessary sometimes, you still have work to do on yourself. So it's like being self-aware, being honest enough to say, okay, God, what's the work that you need to do in me? And I feel like that was the later part of my 20s.
Okay, so
what
happens to you when you get saved? Like, what happens? How do you come back? Hold that thought. We'll be right back. We're going to go to a commercial break, and we're going to hear Stephanie's return to Christ. Come on. Hand. Hey, everybody. We are back. All you hear me say is Marco's hand. He kind of did the little pointing at me,
Our director.
And all you see is the hand. All you see is the hand. It's like thing. It's like one hand is there. You don't see Marco. But, hey, let's come back and talk about your encounter on how you got back. Like,
sure.
Yeah, right? Because it's kind of wild how, raised in church, boom, you kind of rebel and do your thing, and then you kind of like in the middle, and like you're not doing anything. Basically, you're just in the middle. And then how does God get your attention again? Because you could have went the other way.
Right.
So what made you go that way, and how did God do that?
I would say it was probably like a culmination of a few things. But the point to get when I got to that point, it was a lot. Like, we had a big, thing happen with my family, and the childhood home that my parents built was stolen from us by, an ex-business partner, and parents were taken advantage of, and, all of that. So it led us to basically from, basically everything that my family had worked for was stripped away from us. And, going back to the immigration thing, they just didn't have that knowledge to be able to, or the power to really defend themselves. So we found ourselves, moving from 6-bedroom house with a guest house, an acre of land, and shoving all of that into a 3-bedroom apartment that we didn't have, enough space for at all. And at that time I was, and it seemed like it was a far distance, but it wasn't really a far distance. But I guess at that time I felt like I had moved away from everything where I was, because we moved to a different city. And so it kind of was like an excuse to say, well, I'm not going to church anymore because the church that I grew up in and church that I'm used to going is not near me anymore, right? So stop going to church, very lukewarm, in a bad relationship. And basically my household is kind of like scrambled because, my mom's struggling to, become kind of like the head of the house, because my dad was in such a deep, dark depression after losing everything that he built, that it was just a dark place at home, and so then just one day randomly, I came home, and I know my mom had been going to a church that was nearby, and she had invited me, and I think my sister invited me before too, and I just didn't go because I didn't want to experience a new church. I was just like, well, that's the church that I went to, and obviously if I wasn't living right, I wasn't really wanting to go to church anyways, to be honest. But I came home one day on a Saturday, and I grew up in church. My parents are very traditional, I guess I look a little bit non-traditional maybe before because I had like my head shaved, and now I have piercings and stuff. But like my parents don't like piercings. They didn't like tattoos or anything like that. And so I come home, and my mom is like cooking, which she always loves to cook for people. And there's like 3 tatted guys in my living room, just tatted, So they're like sitting in my living room, my mom's cooking for them, and I'm just like, this isn't somebody, this isn't a group of people that would normally be in our home. Like we might talk to them and like all of that outside of the home, but they weren't normally be in our house.
They're kicking it in your house.
And my mom's like hanging out, and so I was like, hi, how's it going? Like, what is going on here? Are we getting robbed? But turns out that not only was like my family, because at this time it was just me and my brother living with my parents. My older sister's already moved, and my older sister got married. Well, at the time, My oldest sister, her husband left her when my nephew was born. So she had just had a baby. Her husband left, and she needed to move into our 3-bedroom apartment with the baby also.
Wow.
And so I guess my mom had spoken to some people at the church and gotten them to help her move. And so that's who those 3 guys were, people from the church that had offered to help my sister move in. And so, they invite me into the living room, and they're like, how's it going? Your mom's told us about you. I was a chef at the time. And I remember, I don't know if you want me to say names or not, but I remember, one of them telling me that, you should come out to church. Like, when's the last time you went to church and stuff? And I always cry because growing up the way that I grew up, like, I was never the one in the other seat.
Yeah.
I was always the one inviting people to church everywhere that I went, from my friends at church, in my youth group, asking people to, just random people, anyone. I always talked about my youth group. I always talked about my church. I always invited people to church, and I had never been the one to get invited.
Yeah.
And that was just like God telling me, like, you need to come back, And so from then on, I just started doing what I could to make it to church on Sundays. And it's not, and I say church, and I don't want people to think that, like, well, you can still be saved and not go to church, Yeah. But there's a difference, and there's something that the church brings as far as relationships, as far as accountability and things like that. And those things I was not having outside of a church family. So,
hey, can I ask you something?
Sure.
Right there? When they ask you that, because I know right now you kind of go and you get this, it taps into something on how you're feeling. Like, do you remember how you were feeling when they asked you the question? Because you're like in limbo and they're bringing you back, right?
I literally, that's how it felt. I just felt like in shock. Like, I wouldn't necessarily say that I felt like offended by them personally, but I was kind of just like, what? Like, I go to church, like, why are you inviting me to church? I'm not like one of the people that gets invited to church, like, I didn't really see myself as that. But it was basically a humbling moment, because it was like, no, like, you are, they're ministering to you because you are not connected, so that's how I felt.
That's dope. And so at that moment you make a decision.
I decided to start going, and it was very difficult for me because I was a chef at the time, and so, Sunday brunch, everybody wants to go to brunch.
So you had to make a decision, and it was like you leaving something you loved.
So I mean, at that time, well, that's not when I left what I loved, but it was like, hey, this is your
I remember when you used to show up in your chef cup.
I would sometimes I would go before service, or like before going to work, and sometimes I would leave in the middle of brunch service, go to church, and then go back to work, because that's how much I was committed to, like, making it, even if I worked on a Sunday, which I worked every Sunday.
So that was like God speaking to you, and then you're like running. And were people thinking you're crazy? Like,
I think,
because now you have your friends going like, so you're back. the right, like, the believers are your back, and the other ones are going, what's wrong with you?
I would say, like, well, I didn't have, like, my believer friends weren't at that church, so it was like new people, but I would say that probably, like, my youth pastor was happy to see that, because they always, like, follow you and stuff like that, and then I think at that point I had kind of like my group of friends that partied and stuff like that. I think they were kind of understanding, because they always knew, like, how I really was. They knew that the party me wasn't really Stephanie, like, it was not something that was me. And so I would say that it was kind of like a little bit of a shocker, where it's like I had put going to church a priority, above my job, my career, and my friends. So
because later that would happen. Tap into that a little bit.
So
right, because the whole point is, how did you get even where you're at right now, right? So so you start going to church.
So I became a chef at the place that I was at, because I finished culinary school and, started as a prep cook. I would make, I remember, Nutella brownies every single day. I don't remember the recipe, but I remember I would make it every day. And then eventually I got the chef position. And I think I was only there maybe 4 months, 3-4 months working as a chef. And so when I started going to church, it was Get Rap Church. And I met Pastor Juan. But Pastor Juan was a pastor, because remember, I grew up in church, but we didn't really have, like, so this is something that, I don't know, like, to me, from my lens, right, is that not that all churches were, like, cliquish or gossipy, but sometimes that's kind of what tends to happen. And so my mom just kind of always told me, like, we go to church for God. We don't necessarily go to church for people, in the sense of, like, let's not get offended if so-and-so didn't invite you to the barbecue. And sometimes that happens a lot, So I kind of already went to church without the desire to be like, I need to go find my friends and somebody that I hang out with all the time, you know?
Yeah.
So I kind of just continued doing that when I started going to Get Wrapped. And then, so I say that because pastor was pastor, right? It wasn't somebody that you really had close relationships with.
Yeah.
Maybe some of the leaders had friends, like, or were friends with him or something,
Yeah.
but it was never someone that like I could just call and talk to or just
Yeah.
swing by his office. I never did that. Like, that was
Yeah.
beyond me. So one day we go to the office, my mom and I, to Pastor Juan and Ruthie's office, and I really still to this day don't even remember why we were there, but we went there and we were saying hi to them, and Pastor was on the phone. I think he had a phone call that he was taking, and
Yeah.
then I'm like talking about him like he's not in front of me. he was on the phone, and then the office phone rang, and at this time it was just Pastor Juan and Ruthie at the
Yeah.
office, and
Doing the booklets and all that, remember?
yeah, it was after that. So
Yeah.
then, I just saw him, fumbling to try to answer both calls, and I just offered like, hey, do you want me to answer one of those? And he's like, yeah, sure. Just say Get Wrapped Church. So I answer it, and I say Get Wrapped Church, and the joke is that, still to this day, I'm still answering the phone and saying Get Wrapped Church.
That's wild.
But when I answered and I said Get Wrapped Church, like, I heard,
Don't answer the phone.
who's calling?
Oh,
But
God.
I audibly heard God say, like, you need to be here. And so I kept it to myself. I didn't really say anything. I told one person, and that person was like, well, you need to tell Pastor, right? And I was like,
Yeah.
I don't know Pastor like that. Like, I ain't just gonna tell him what God said to me. Like, I just hear him preach on Sundays, But then I did. I started just showing up at the office. I took it as like, you need to be here, like they need you for something. I didn't really understand. I didn't really ask
you're like
God to give me
Abraham.
I didn't really ask
you
God to,
left
like-
the chef job without knowing. He said, I will show you. So go ahead.
I didn't really know what it meant, but I said, well, if he needs me here, then that's what I'm going to do. So I would show up at the office in the mornings, and I would just make coffee sometimes. Sometimes I'd just take out the trash that was in the kitchen because they didn't really have anything for me to do.
Yeah.
And they didn't really either know why I was there.
Yeah.
I think it was like a little bit weird for both of us, but we are just like, all right, cool. Well, for all three
Yeah.
of us, but all right, cool. And then, we'll do stuff. And then, I would go in the morning and then go work as a chef. Go in the morning, then go work as a chef. And then I felt like God told me to leave, my chef job. And that was really hard because that didn't make any sense at all.
That's where everybody was like,
That's where everybody thought I was crazy. Like, my friends had thrown me a party when I got promoted, like a huge surprise party when I got promoted, because they were so happy and they knew how much I wanted to be a chef, that it had finally happened. My parents were super proud because they had been calling me a chef ever since I went to school, and I was like, no, I'm not a chef yet. Like, I'm going to school,
Yeah.
And even when I was a cook, I was like, I didn't like when people called me chef because I was a cook, chefs and their big egos and stuff. So I was like, no, I'm not a chef. I'm a cook.
Look, all the media guys right now going, that's why.
So I was like, no, I'm not a chef. And so then when I finally get it, I'm only there for maybe 4 months or so, 4 to 6 months. And then he tells me to leave. And so it's like, what? Like, are you kidding? Like, I have all these student loans. Like, I finally got the promotion. Like, this pay raise is coming, all sorts of stuff. And so then I quit. And that was a big leap. Yeah, so that was difficult, and for a short period of time, I would say that I kind of did try to do things on my own.
Yeah.
As far as, because I knew I was like, okay, well, I still have bills, I still have finances, things that I have to pay for, obviously all these student loans and all sorts of stuff, where I'm like, how am I going to do this if I don't have a job and I'm just volunteering at the church? And so, I mean, he's always going to sustain you, right? And so I remember, Pastor Juan and Ruthie would, the church would give me love offerings, and I didn't want to accept them because I was like, this is not why I'm here. I'm like, in my head, I was like, I refuse to receive any money. I'm like, because then I didn't want it to seem as if I was interested in money or I was coming to do this. I was like, I'm only here because God asked me to be here. But, then we learned in that too, where they're like, well, God told me, like, you better receive the blessing because you ain't going to block mine.
And
so,
you also need gas to get here.
Exactly. So I went through a little time period of maybe finding jobs that I thought, okay, well, in my flesh of like, I need to make money and do this. But then God lined it up, and he showed me, and this is what he taught me, because it was very difficult. That he said, I gave you this passion and this talent for being a chef, and that is part of who you are, but I also gave you this gift of administration, and it's not that I'm throwing this away, you'll be able to use it again, but right now I need you to be walking in your gift of administration. And so that kind of was like a comfort to me, because I was like, okay, good. Like, I didn't like
Yeah.
I didn't just like feel like I lost everything. I felt like he's shifting my life into a different reason. And I mean, 7 years later, I'm still here. I'm still here. But I mean, he gave me that. He actually transitioned me into like
I think just to keep her like, you know, we'll let her cook once a month for the office or something like that. That way, you know,
I don't know.
you still feel good about yourself.
I feel great without cooking. I'm okay.
You're like, I'm good.
Yeah, I'm like, I'm good. No, so then, you know, that was, I feel like, his comfort to me. And he's never told me otherwise. Everyone's like, don't you miss it? Don't you want to have this? Don't you want to have that? As far as like cooking and chef goes. And I'm like, yeah, it's like my flesh, you know, misses it. I still have culinary friends and chefs that are like doing all sorts of different stuff that I would like to do. But I'm like, if this is what God told me, then he still has me here for a purpose, and I wouldn't change it for anything. You know, you could. Cool. I don't think I'd be able to grow in the same way that I've grown being learning to be an assistant, because I mean, I didn't go to school for that. I did take 1 year of broadcast journalism in high school. Therefore,
there it is, Marco. There it is.
Yep.
Man, we might as well have a button or something that goes bam, bam, bam. Push a button. I'm waiting for them to hit that button, whatever button it is. That's gonna have some sound or something on the soundboard.
Button, but yeah, that's the insider, because they always tease me about it with the radio.
Press that button. There's a button on that soundboard. Oh man.
But no, it's been a long journey of just learning and figuring things out.
They're scared to hit the wwomp, womp, womp. They don't know which ones to hit.
The whole thing.
Oh man, that was good. You did 1 year of broadcast, bro. Look at where you got you.
Mm-hmm.
Come on. Now we're on the radio.
Now we're on the radio. No, I feel like that more so helped me, because it was a lot of things where he said, okay, I gifted you with this, but I also gifted you with that. And you know, we say it jokingly, but I genuinely feel that, because even classes that I took in high school or things that I learned like with my family, like we laugh because obviously now we have a media team, but back then, y'all, and I'm gonna just throw all of us under the bus, I was doing word art and pastors were like, wow, this is a great flyer. And I was like, it's word art. And I'm like, you can pick, you know, there's like 8 little set options, but that was new to them, and I had that talent, and it's what worked for that time. You know? So I feel like, you know, it was all more.
Shout out to my teacher who taught me word art.
Shout out to BCIS class.
We're gonna run you through the segments. We have to run you through the segments. So we're gonna go to one more break, and then we're gonna run you through the segments. I think we're gonna do the struggle was real. You think you know me, because I think you're gonna like that one. And back, I was gonna say Back to the Future, Dear Younger Me, and I get to explain them this time. All right, we'll be right back. This is real. We're back with This Is Real. We've been talking to Stephanie. Man, you're taking us on the journey of your life. It's been pretty dope. And you were born in what?
What, the year? 1992.
Yeah. 1992. Yeah. Wow. Come on. Houston, Texas. Yeah. All right. So, you know what we're going to start with? Let's start with You Think You Know Me.
What is that?
Hey, let me... You're so funny. Okay, man. You think you know me. You know, a lot of times in Instagram and all those places, like in social media, they will usually people just go off of the pic and they start to create judgment based upon a moment or a picture, and which is not accurate, you know. And then this is the time where you get to tell everybody, because there might have been assumptions that they see you on This Is Real, or they see you, they're like, oh, look at her, she thinks she all that, and they say something about you, and then they're wrong. Yeah. So this is where you get to set the record straight, as Stephanie would say.
We don't have enough time for that record, but I will give you 1 or 2.
Yeah, this is great. She's like, well, I'll pay a whole.
I know, right? I can't wait.
Oh my God, she's like, but you know how we do it on the shows. You have to start with You Think You Know.
You think you know me. Well, you think you know me. I feel like a lot of times I get that. I think in the broad spectrum, right, of that you work for a church. Yeah. So there's like this huge assumption that you got it made. Like, oh, your job is so fun and easy. And, well, you must be like rolling in dough because you work for a church. And like, all you do is fun work trips and, you know, all that different stuff that I've been hearing for like ever now. Where I'm just like, oh, you work for a church. And that's from like all sorts of different people where it's like, yo, like, yes, we have fun. Yes, we do trips. I'm like, but if I brought you along to like all of our ministry trips, all of the hours, and again, this is for God. This isn't for you. And I think that's part of why sometimes we don't show it, because we're just like, because then you'll get the haters too of like, well, why are you giving and like sacrificing and still showing it to people? Like, shouldn't you do it? Whatever. So it's like, but I do get that a lot. And I mean, it's just like, oh well, that's cool, that's so fun, you work for the church and you must do nothing. And it's just like
we're golfing somewhere.
like we're, and I feel like, man, that's, and or then they see the highlights, right, of like, oh, you're traveling, you're going this because at one point you were speaking and traveling a lot, so I'm traveling with you. And I'm just like, and I think we have a picture one time where I have like 5 luggages.
Oh yeah, the 5 suitcases.
And it's just like you're doing this meeting, that meeting, he's speaking here, you're selling merchandise there, you're doing this and that, you're ministering at altar calls that are going to like 1 a.m.
early in the morning, late at night.
And then you have to be there at 7 in the morning. You can't look tired and do this, and you gotta put makeup on. And like, and so it's a lot. And I think a lot of times the misconception that people have is that like, versus ministry, like working in a church, as far as ministry, working for ministry, and like say a CEO of a company or an assistant at maybe a different like corporate job, is that you're probably not as emotionally or spiritually invested in it as you are with ministry and working at a church. Because if somebody quits the corporate office, you're not like, oh man, I really missed him. Maybe if you're friends, I'm like, but when you're at a church and you were here for 7 years, you build a relationship with people, and sometimes people leave, or sometimes people say things about you, or people, all sorts of different things, and those are all emotional like tears that happen at your heart, and spiritual things that you're like, oh, I really want to say this, but I'm gonna be the mature person, because they're always looking at you and pointing the finger, like, aren't you pastor's assistant, or don't you gotta get Raj, and so I feel like the spiritual and the emotional toll that comes with working for ministry, people just see the highlights and they're just like, oh, it's just fun and you just do this, and it's just like, even financial, like you don't even, like I think you had shared before, you're like, you don't even want to say that, oh, you got this place or you got this thing or that, because it's just like, people are like, oh, well, you're rolling in dough. I'm like, you know how long I worked? I didn't have a check, like, you know what I mean? And it was a sacrifice that I know the church made to even hire me as a full-time employee, you know? And so you think of things in a different lens. So you think you know me, but it's a lot more than what just the highlights of Instagram are.
Okay. And so you want to share another one, or that's
that one's pretty accurate. I mean,
that's good. We're gonna let you go with that one. Okay. Sure. So I definitely want to share a Dear Younger Me. So this is an episode where usually what happens.
What is
like, that? In Back to the Future, the guy got in the DeLorean and he got to pick a time and date to go back to. So this is where you get to go back to a time where, if you could give Stephanie advice,
right?
When would you go back, and what advice would you give her?
I would probably go to, I don't know what age specifically, but probably like between 15 and 16, I think, because I feel like that's whenever it was becoming more like accessible to like party and fall into those other kinds of things. And so I would go back and tell her, I mean, she was still strong in her faith, right? But then she was, all these other things looked enticing, and so I would ask her to endure it, to stand strong in your faith, endure through it, still be the outcast in the sense of, oh, 70 doesn't cuss, or 70 doesn't drink, or 70 that, and just get through it, because that, I feel like, even though you don't regret moments, I feel like it would have saved a lot of pain, a lot of, sadness and things like that, kind of like forgiving of yourself, because that's a journey that you have to take whenever you do mess up and go through things like that. So I feel like I would tell her, to endure in your strength, in your faith, and stay strong to go through it, because it just saves you a lot. You don't have to experience things to avoid them. Like, you could have just watched them and not have to go through them.
Hey, I'm gonna put you back in the DeLorean. You just got back. Now hey, what's up, girl? I'm putting you back, and then I'm gonna I'm putting you back, and where I want to send you, because I know you're strong. Since I've known you, you've been in relationships, singleness, but you're very strong and passionate about singleness. Even though you enjoy relationships too, I feel like I would like to put you back at a time where maybe like you just so desperately wanted to be in a relationship, and at the same time you learned a whole lot of stuff about being single, which is actually helping you in your relationship. Yeah. Right? So if I put you back, what would you say to that Stephanie before she learned to embrace? Because I know that you're pretty strong. You're adamant about that. Like you're passionate about it, I guess.
I feel like there's so many like voices that speak to single people and single people in general, and then single people who are believers, that it's really difficult to find out what you should do and what God's calling of you to do, right? Because all the voices are telling you. And so for me, what I had to learn was like, okay, if God's calling me to this, then it doesn't matter what others think. It doesn't matter what you look like to other people. And people who may have good intentions, but they don't know what God's asking of you, you know?
Yeah.
So for me, what happened with relationships was, is that I was kind of like a serial relationship where it was like another one relationship to the next. And I never spent time by myself, never spent much time being friends with the person that I was dating before dating them.
Which is important.
Yeah. And so during that time, it was kind of like, okay, how do we, kind of, be disciplined in having feelings, but also keeping our holiness and keeping our relationship with the Lord, because sometimes the kind of extremists of Christians will be like, oh, you guys are attracted to one another, you guys are good believers, you should get married. And then they didn't know anything about the person's character, they didn't know anything about their person's past traumas and all different things, or like, hey, I'm actually like somebody who likes being around people all the time, and you're not somebody who likes being people around. You know what I mean? So it's just like those things that have to be learned through friendship, and things that you can kind of step aside from yourself and look at yourself, and it's like, okay, we're friends right now, but I'm having these like maybe jealous feelings, or I'm having these lustful thoughts, or I'm having this, that you should be able to be self-aware without having the title of relationships. And I feel like that's what happens in friendships. But basically, don't allow others to define what your friendships look like.
Talk to yourself.
No, that's what I would say, is don't allow others to define what your friendships look like.
Okay.
It doesn't matter if 1,000 people think that you should go with that person. If that's not what God is telling you to do, then don't do it. Don't come onto the peer pressure. It doesn't matter if people are saying like, oh, why are you single? You're so pretty. You should this, you should that. Like, you should have da-da-da. Well, if God brings me along, this is something that I learned, in my singleness, that I was like, it doesn't matter if God brought along the perfect quote unquote man to me and I still hadn't fixed the issues that I had within myself, then I would have ruined that person, And so that was something that I would tell myself, is just only drown out the voices and listen to God's only.
That's really good. That's really good. And now you're back. Hey, how's it going? You're back from a thing. That's really good. I just enjoy, because I guess I got to see your seasons, I'm still seeing your life play out, and kudos to you, because I know I know it's difficult. Everything is difficult, right? Dieting, budgeting.
None of these seasons were perfect, FYI. Yeah.
The Bible doesn't ever edit the stories, right? So even when you see the stories, you see Abraham leaving in Genesis 12, then you see him going from place to place while he's going to the place that God is gonna give him, and he's putting these stones that I believe are like altars as remembrance of what God has done. And then there's the one spot where he doesn't, and all of a sudden, he sells his wife, and then gets her back, and then keep going. And because obviously he would need her. It's funny, even thinking that he would, that wouldn't have worked, because he would need her still as part of the promise. But that happens in life, right? Like, so I feel like sometimes when you hear people share their story, or by faith, or they're hearing you share your story, the process has it's never non-edited. In the process, it's not pretty,
right?
Because you're in a process. You messed up over here, but you're still moving forward. But it's like, oh, I messed up. The goal is to keep moving forward, and to keep unlearning, relearn. So kudos to you for going through even a season. You went through a couple years, right? Where you were like
3 years.
3 years. She goes, yeah. I mean, that might have been difficult, but rewarding, right? Because you probably have learned a lot in those 3 years that you wouldn't have learned if you still would have been going, right? Okay, so this one is the final one.
Sure.
It's called The Struggle Was Real, because everybody's like, the struggle's real, man, the struggle's real. So, okay, the struggle was real, because tell us something that you struggled with that you overcame, and then give us the how you overcame it. And that's why we call it The Struggle Was Real.
So the struggle was real. I would say that, I don't know, there's so many struggles that I've had. I've had a lot of struggles. For me, I guess I could give one relationship-wise, in singleness. The struggle was real because I I guess I grew up in kind of, like I said, a traditional home environment. So we didn't talk openly about sex. We didn't talk openly about, relationships. It was just kind of like behind closed doors. And so the struggle for me was being open now that I had Christian relationships, as far as like friendships and leaders and mentors. I struggled with being able to be open and vulnerable with that, because I think unintentionally it was kind of like a secrecy thing in my home, that whenever you are messing up or whenever you are struggling with something, you don't just go and talk to your friend or your sister or your brother or your pastor or your whatever and say like, yo, like, I'm really struggling right now. But I went through that. Like I did. I had to learn to like, okay, I need accountability. These people need to know where I'm at. These people, not like, physically, yes, but where I'm at mentally. Like right now I may be weak, and I've literally done that before. I share this all the time where I'm like, I went to my best friend's house with her husband and I just sat there and watched a movie, because I was like, yo, if I don't go and I just stay there, I'm going to go and do something dumb. And I just have to sit there bored, and y'all know me, I don't like movies. So I'm like, third wheeling, because I'm like, I refuse to go down that road again. That's I refuse to let myself mess up, but I had to be open with it, and not be in that realm of secrecy, which the enemy loves to keep you in, So I feel like that was a really big struggle, and continues to be a struggle that you have to overcome, of being vulnerable with the right people.
That's really good. And so how'd you overcome that with all the fear and stuff?
I
know you went, but how do you push through when you got to make that decision?
To me, it was knowing that God's already forgiven you. So say you go and you're vulnerable to the wrong person, and 1,000 people are talking about you. It doesn't matter. It does not matter. I think it goes back to not listening to the voices that aren't an influence in your life. It's like, it doesn't matter. Yeah, sure, I did those things. Sure, I did that. But God already forgave me, and this is what I'm doing to it. So, but then whenever you're vulnerable and open to people who are they love you and they want to walk with you, man, there's nothing like that healing that comes from a friend that prays with you. And it's like, man, I know that you messed here, or you messed up here, or you did this there, or whatever. It's like, we're going to pray and we're going to move forward, and we're not going to let you keep stumbling, So that healing is unmatched.
And I think something that you're basically stating too, right? Because you made a decision to go to their house and watch the movie, right? And sometimes people don't make it there, even though they have that choice there. And I think, what you're basically saying is you also have to be real to yourself, right? Because if you lie to yourself, you're only going to keep, you lie to everybody else, but you'll also destroy yourself. And I think when you're honestly saying to yourself, if I don't go to my friend's house and watch this movie, I already know what's going to happen. And you're making the choice. You're basically led by the Spirit at that moment. You got to crucify your thoughts, and I think everybody, that's just forever, So man, Stephanie, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Sharing your story. Remember that those with true faith accept God's word, they win his approval, and they recognize his power. The word always works if you decide to accept it and let it work for you.
And thank
Juan Martinez from This Is Real.
And I'm Stephanie Rave, and we're so glad you joined us. If you enjoyed the show, be sure to like, share, and subscribe, and turn on your notification bell so you get notified every single time we have a new episode.
And don't forget, in Houston, Texas, on 100.7 FM, every single Saturday night, we're on the airwaves from 6:30 to 7:30, man, with real people, real problems, real solutions. The show is rocking.
Amen.
But not only that, not only is the show rocking, we're also reaching 53 cities, 51 state and county jails and prisons. And what we're doing is we're bringing the word to them. We're bringing them some laughter and some good times and some fire.
Amen.
And so for that, we need some partners. So if you want to partner with us, please click on the link below.
And don't forget to follow us on social media, #ThisIsReal, or on any other platforms, Pastor Juan Martinez.
Hey, that's a wrap. Peace.